Well, for more, we're joined by Oliver Griffith, former director of the American Chamber of Commerce here in France. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Your reaction to that report and whether or not candidates want to distance themselves or align themselves with the
Well,
US.
it's a super interesting election. Obviously, the Democrats are all for Trump, and the Republicans are kind of straddling. Politicians have always straddled in the middle. They will say what they think voters will want to hear. In this case, if they're in districts around Washington, D.C., which I think voted 90% Hillary Clinton and is very liberal and has a lot of government employees who are still suffering under toxic shock from Trump in their jobs, and thus the families also. They're going to not want to mention Trump, even if they hold traditional Republican values.
It's strange because there seem to be parallel universes in this election. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, it's already the most expensive midterm race ever. $5.2 billion has been spent. And what's interesting to see are the pledges by the business community. Now, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce giving the lion's share to Republican candidates, even though many businessmen don't agree with the U.S. president when it comes to tariffs and when it comes to his rhetoric on immigration.
Well, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which I know relatively well, has always given money to both sides, definitely more to Republicans, but they look at local races a lot to see who will vote how on what issue for internal economic measures and also on the international side. What's interesting in this, though, is that The Economist, recently the magazine, showed that the Democrats have an overwhelming majority in giving, actually, in donations, and usually the parties that have had that have won big time in the midterm election. So they give the Democrats a 92% chance of winning. And they're getting support both from business and individuals and unions, a traditional base, which is somewhat new for the Democratic Party, that business is contributing so much, and not just the kind of Facebooks and Amazons and those companies.
Yeah, because traditionally
companies.
You've got Silicon Valley, which gives to Democrats, and people who work in, say, the defense sector, energy, these kinds of fields who give to Republicans. Wall Street this time, for the first time since 2008, giving more to Democrats than Republicans. What does that tell you?
Well, there's a lot of companies that are worried. A lot of companies know a lot more about international economics and supply chains than Donald Trump and his supporters seem to know or want to admit. In fact, they see these tariffs and kind of the abrogation of American economic leadership.
They're not going to reward
worldwide.
them for the record highs in the stock market?
The record highs come from the Obama administration, and those people who follow economics relatively closely know that. Of course, Trump will try to take credit for it. And then, of course, some of it comes from this huge tax cut that he did, which was absolutely unnecessary in a time of economic growth, and which will mortgage America's future with a lot of debt for years to come. That's one of the main dangers of what he's done economically.
That tax cut, though, when you look again at those numbers from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, it appears as though that seems to override everything. Those business leaders love the tax cuts.
Business leaders will always love tax cuts, but there's a number of wiser business leaders, the Warren Buffett types, who say, look, this was the wrong type of tax cut and at the wrong time. So business is starting to turn around because the traditional alliances of Democrats, which are unions and kind of anti-big business, and Republican, which is pro-big business and pro-free trade, is totally broken down under Donald Trump, like so much else. Donald Trump is not a free trader, and the Democrats are now the free traders. That's a total reversal.
And yet, again, a lot of money going into Republican candidates from that Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, they will play both sides.
We haven't talked about the Democrats. And what does the business community think of a Democratic Party which is split into two factions, right? Between the moderates and those that are more on the left, closer to Bernie Sanders.
That of course, is the big play within the Democratic Party. If the left kind of takes control of the party, whether after they win the House or the Senate or not, or in the future, that's obviously the older wing of the Democratic Party, who have some very interesting social policies, but who are not generally the free traders and who don't emphasize kind of the more business-friendly economic policy. So it's preferable for the Democrats that the moderate wing, the centrist wing will take control and be the dominant wing, because they can attract the moderate Republicans, and in the long run, it'll do the Democratic Party better.
I just want to call up one last time that chart that was published in the Financial Times earlier this week for sourced the Center for Responsive Politics. This is the amount from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. You still see that it is the lion's share that are given to Republican candidates in races that are taking place across the United States next Tuesday. I just want one more time to ask you about just all the money. Every election cycle, it seems to be more and more and more. How much does money matter? So if we're talking about Democrats have gotten more money, does that guarantee that they do better?
Not necessarily, because Donald Trump won the presidential election with very little money, because he controlled the media, or at least the media presence, whether positive or negative. Even bad media is good media in his view, and so he got a lot of free publicity. Hillary Clinton had more money, but money still counts, certainly, although there's a new factor in American politics now, and that's called faith. America is a very religious society, and a lot of Donald Trump supporters are quite religious evangelicals, and so they kind of choose candidates by faith in this idea that he can bring back the old America of 20 or 30 years ago, which of course is not true, and that he will be good for their pocketbook, which is also not true because his policies are actually not supporting long-term growth in America, the kind of growth that you need for the working class whites who voted for him. So it's money, but also faith now.
Oliver Griffith, one final question for you. Talking about faith, there was that horrific shooting that took place last weekend in Pittsburgh at a synagogue. There's been political violence. There's been harsh political discourse. Is that going to, in the end, help or hurt the sitting party?
That's very hard to say. I think it will ultimately hurt them. And the fact that Trump just said now that he would consider having the army shoot at the Honduran migrants that are going to come to the Mexican border, I think that will scare off some of his borderline supporters. The other ones, his real base of 35% will go gung-ho, this is America we want, strong, and these are isolated cases of crazies in the synagogue and elsewhere, and this doesn't really represent our values, but we want a strong America. So we'll have to wait and see. November 6th is going to be extremely interesting. I wouldn't make any clear predictions, although most of the polls say 70-80% that the Democrats will take at least the House. But then most of those same polls said that Trump would lose and Hillary Clinton would be president.
Well, they did indeed. Oliver Griffith, former director of the American Chamber of Commerce in France, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.